I finally found out who's been blackmailing me, and now I have no idea what to do. The first letter showed up typed and unsigned in my locker. I know what you did last summer, and if you don't do what I want, I'm going to tell. My hands started shaking. Who the hell sent this to me? And what the hell did I do last summer? I couldn't remember anything, but I'd spent a lot of it wasted with my friends doing dumb stuff. There were definitely holes in my memory. Had I done something awful? Did I hurt someone? The second message was an email from a throwaway. Stop pretending you don't know what I'm talking about. Your secret is safe for now, but that can change. I spent hours racking my brain, trying to fill in the gaps from that summer. I tried to casually ask my friends, but what if one of them was the one sending the letters? I was scared to press too hard. I had no idea who was safe to talk to. By the fifth message, I was barely sleeping. Time's running out. Everyone at school will know what kind of person you really are. I started avoiding my friends, stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, took different routes to class. My hands would shake whenever I opened my locker, expecting another letter. I jumped whenever I got an email notification. I tried responding to the emails asking what they wanted, but they bounced back as undeliverable. I watched everyone at school, trying to figure out who hated me enough to do this, or who I'd screwed over without even knowing it. But the messages felt personal in a way that scared me, like whoever wrote them really knew me, really thought I'd done something unforgivable. The letters got more specific, but still made no sense. Remember the blue house? Remember what you buried? I have proof. But I couldn't remember anything with a blue house, and I was pretty sure I'd never buried anything except a hamster when I was 7, but the specificity made me doubt myself. Had I gotten away with doing something horrible? Was it coming for me now? I couldn't take it anymore, and told my older brother Miles about it, showing him the emails with shaking hands. He said it was probably someone messing with me, but helped me try to trace them. We used this sketchy website that claimed it could track IP addresses, and after the next email came, we got a result that made my blood run cold. The IP address was our home network. Someone in our house is sending these, Miles said, looking as confused as I felt. That narrowed it down to my 3 siblings. Miles, who'd just helped me trace it, so probably not him unless he was playing some sick long game. My younger sister Hazel, who was 13 and sometimes mean but not usually cruel. Or my older sister Charlotte, who'd been acting weird lately, always on her laptop, always closing it when I walked by. I started watching them all carefully, feeling paranoid in my own house. Hazel seemed too genuinely oblivious when I hinted about getting weird messages. Charlotte had been mad at me for telling Mom about her sneaking out, so maybe this was revenge. Miles had no motive I could think of, but he was smart enough to pull it off and make it look like he was helping. I searched Hazel's room while she was at soccer practice, my heart pounding the whole time, but found nothing. I tried to get on Charlotte's laptop, but she'd changed her password. I even checked Miles's stuff, feeling guilty about suspecting him, but found only college applications. The next email was different. Final warning. Tomorrow at noon, everyone knows unless you confess first. Confess to what? I screamed at my laptop. I was desperate enough that I considered standing up at lunch and admitting to every bad thing I'd ever done just to make it stop. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus in class, kept checking the clock as noon approached. That night I couldn't sleep, so I went to the kitchen for water and saw the computer in the den was still on. The email account was logged in, the throwaway Gmail account that had been sending me threats. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out as I clicked on the sent folder and saw all the messages to me, plus drafts of others that hadn't been sent yet, each one more threatening than the last. I heard footsteps and quickly took a photo of the screen with my phone before closing the browser. Someone was coming downstairs. This was it. I was about to find out which sibling had been torturing me for weeks, making me paranoid and scared in my own house. I hid behind the door, watching through the crack as the figure entered the den and sat at the computer. They opened the email account, the same one I'd just been looking at, and started typing a new message. The screen illuminated their face in the dark room, and I froze right where I was standing. It was my mom. I glared at her. "Mom!" I shouted, rounding the corner. Her face turned to me. She slammed the laptop shut and stood up so fast her chair rolled back and hit the wall. I held up my phone with the screenshot of her sent folder and watched her eyes go wide when she saw what I'd captured. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. Just this weird choking sound like she couldn't figure out what to say. My whole body was shaking, but I kept my phone up between us like it was a shield. She finally found words, and they came out defensive and sharp. She said it was a wake-up call, that she'd found a video of me last summer completely wasted, and she was worried I'd done something dangerous I couldn't remember. Her voice had this edge to it, like I was the one who should be apologizing, like I was the problem here. I felt my anger mixing with confusion, because what video was she even talking about? I pulled up the other screenshots on my phone, the ones showing all the threatening emails and the drafts that were even worse, the ones about telling colleges and ruining my future. She waved her hand like it was nothing and said she never actually sent those worst ones, that she was just trying to make me take responsibility. She kept using that phrase, take responsibility, like she was some kind of concerned parent and not someone who'd been terrorizing me for weeks. I felt like I was going crazy because none of this felt like protection. It felt like punishment for something I didn't even remember doing. I demanded to know what I supposedly buried at the Blue House, and her face got this look, this mix of disappointment and something else I couldn't read. She said in this tone that made me doubt myself all over again, that I knew what I did, that I needed to search my conscience. I wanted to scream because I genuinely didn't remember anything about a Blue House or burying anything except that hamster when I was 7. She refused to give me actual details, just kept repeating that I needed to search my conscience and think about my choices. Our voices must have gotten loud because suddenly Charlotte appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, asking what was going on. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Hazel came down, rubbing her eyes and looking confused. Mom immediately switched modes, her voice going calm and controlled as she told them to go back to bed. She said this was between her and me, and they didn't need to worry about it. Charlotte looked at me, and then at Mom, and I could see her trying to figure out what was happening. Hazel just stood there on the bottom step, looking small and scared. I felt humiliated that my siblings were seeing me like this, caught in the middle of the night confronting Mom about her insane blackmail campaign. Mom repeated that they should go back to bed, her voice getting firmer, and eventually Charlotte took Hazel's hand and led her back upstairs. I heard their bedroom doors close, and then it was just me and Mom again in the den. She tried to say something else, but I turned and walked away, going up to my room and closing the door. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around me. My phone was clutched in my hand with all the evidence still pulled up on the screen. I made a decision right there in the dark. I was going to find out the truth myself, since she wouldn't tell me. I was done being the victim in whatever twisted game this was. I was going to control what happens at the school tomorrow, before any noon deadline she might have planned. I was going to take back my life from her manipulation. I barely slept, but when morning came, I got up and got ready for school like normal. First thing when I got there, I went straight to the counseling office and asked to see Miss McGee. The secretary said she had an opening in 10 minutes, so I sat in the waiting area, bouncing my leg and trying to organize my thoughts. When Miss McGee called me in, I sat down in her office and just started talking. I told her about being blackmailed without saying who was doing it. She listened without interrupting while I explained the threatening messages, my memory gaps from last summer, and how scared I'd been for weeks. I told her about the sleepless nights and the paranoia and how I'd been avoiding my friends because I didn't know who to trust. Miss McGee was calm and practical in a way that made me feel less crazy. She didn't look shocked or judgmental, just concerned and focused. She suggested I start keeping detailed notes of everything, save all evidence, and make a safety plan for if things got worse. She asked if I felt safe at home, and I hesitated, but said yes, because I wasn't ready to make this into a bigger thing yet. She didn't push me to name the blackmailer, but she made it really clear that what was happening was not okay. She said I deserved support regardless of what I did or didn't do last summer, that nobody has the right to threaten and manipulate me like this. Hearing her say that made something loosen in my chest. I thanked her and promised to come back if I needed to talk more. During lunch, I sat alone in the library instead of the cafeteria and pulled out my phone. My hands shook a little as I pulled up Asher's contact. He was one of my friends from last summer, someone I'd hung out with a lot during those hazy weeks. I typed out a message asking if he remembered anything about a blue house near a lake. I stared at it for a full minute before sending it, because what if he was somehow involved? What if he'd been helping Mom or something? But I needed answers more than I needed to play it safe, so I hit send and watched the message turn from sending to delivered. I spent the rest of lunch checking my phone every 30 seconds, but there was no response. Through my afternoon classes, I kept my phone on my lap under my desk, waiting for it to buzz. Nothing came. By the time the final bell rang, I'd almost convinced myself that Asher wasn't going to respond at all, that maybe my text had freaked him out or tipped him off that I was investigating. I was walking to the parking lot when my phone finally vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Asher's name on the screen. His message said he remembered the lakeside rental with blue siding where a bunch of us crashed for a weekend last July. He said there was one night I got really messed up, and he was worried about me. His message was straightforward and detailed, not defensive or cagey. He said he remembered me being really emotional that night and talking about wanting to bury a time capsule or something, that I kept saying I didn't want to forget who I was. Reading his words, I felt this mix of relief and nervousness. Relief because he didn't sound like he was hiding anything or working with Mom. Nervousness because apparently I had buried something at that blue house, and I still had no idea what it was or why Mom thought it was so terrible. She jerked back in the chair, and her mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. I held up my phone with the photo of her sent emails, and she stared at it like she couldn't believe I had proof. She closed the laptop real quick and stood up, trying to block the screen even though I'd already seen everything. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped my phone. She started saying something about how I didn't understand, how she was trying to protect me, but her voice sounded fake and rehearsed, like she'd been planning what to say if she got caught. I backed away from her because I didn't know what else to do, and went upstairs without saying anything else. My whole body felt weird and disconnected, like this was happening to someone else and I was just watching. I couldn't sleep that night, just kept staring at the photo on my phone and trying to make sense of why my own mom would do this to me. That evening, a few days later, I waited until I heard Mom in the kitchen making dinner, the sound of pots clanging and the oven door opening. I crept into the den and opened the laptop, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. The email account was still logged in because she probably thought I wouldn't dare look again after getting caught. I clicked on the drafts folder and started reading through all the messages she'd written but never sent. The tone was so mean and personal, not like the threatening ones she actually sent, but worse somehow. One draft said I was throwing my life away and breaking her heart. Another one talked about how disappointed she was in the person I'd become. There were drafts about telling my teachers, my friends' parents, even college admissions offices about whatever she thought I'd done. Reading them made my stomach hurt, because these weren't about protecting me or teaching me a lesson. This was about her being angry and scared and wanting to punish me for it. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking as I tried to capture each draft before she came back. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly closed the browser, but I wasn't fast enough. Mom walked in and saw me at the computer, and her face went from surprised to mad in like 1 second. She demanded to know what I was doing, and I told her I was checking my email, which a lie since I was on her account. She completely lost it, yelling about trust and respect, and how I'd proven I couldn't be trusted. She said from now on, I had a 9 o'clock curfew on the school nights, and she was taking my car keys until I showed better judgment. I tried to argue that she was the one who'd been lying and threatening me for weeks, but she talked over me, saying this wasn't up for discussion. She held out her hand for my keys, and I had no choice but to give them to her. The unfairness of it made me so angry I wanted to throw something or punch a wall. She was punishing me for finding out that she'd been terrorizing me, like I was the one who did something wrong. I went to my room and slammed the door, which I knew would make her more mad, but I didn't care anymore. Later that night, I was lying on my bed staring at the ceiling when I heard a soft knock on my door. Charlotte came in without waiting for an answer and sat down on the edge of my bed. She looked uncomfortable, picking at a thread on my blanket and not making eye contact. She said Mom had been different since last summer, acting paranoid and checking everyone's stuff all the time. I sat up and asked her what she meant by different, and Charlotte just shook her head. She said I should ask Mom directly about what happened, but the way she said it made it clear she knew more than she was telling me. I pressed her for details, but she stood up and said she'd already said too much. Before she left, she put her hand on my shoulder and told me to be careful, which made me even more confused and worried about what the hell happened last summer that I couldn't remember. The next morning, the office called me down during second period, and I knew it had to be Ms. McGee checking in. When I got to her office, she had that same calm expression from before, and she asked how things were going at home. I told her they were tense, but okay, leaving out the part about Mom taking my keys and implementing a curfew for discovering her blackmail scheme. Mr. McGee said she'd been thinking about our last conversation and wanted me to know that if things got worse, there were mediation resources available through the school. She had a pamphlet about family counseling and conflict resolution that she slid across her desk toward me. I appreciated that she was following up and actually seemed to care, but I wasn't ready to make this into an official thing with counselors and meetings. I thanked her and promised to keep documenting everything like she'd suggested. She made me promise to come back if I needed to talk, and I said I would even, though I wasn't sure if I actually would. After school, I went straight home and locked myself in my room with my laptop. I opened my cloud backup and started scrolling through photos and videos from last summer, looking for anything about a blue house or a lake. My stomach was in knots the whole time because part of me was scared of what I might find. What if I really had done something terrible and just couldn't remember it? What if Mom was right to be worried? I scrolled through hundreds of photos of me and my friends at parties and bonfires in someone's pool. Most of the pictures were normal teenage stuff, people making dumb faces and throwing up peace signs. But the further I scrolled, the more anxious I got, because I needed to know the truth, even if it was bad. I needed to know what I'd supposedly buried at that blue house. Then I found it. A short video clip that was only like 30 seconds long but made my face burn hot with shame. The video showed me sitting by a fire pit at night, crying and digging in the dirt with my bare hands. I looked completely messed up, my eyes unfocused and my movements sloppy. Someone off camera said something about a time capsule, and I nodded like it made perfect sense, even though I was obviously too drunk to make sense of anything. I was wearing the same shirt from one of the photos at the lake house. Watching myself that vulnerable and out of control was almost worse than not remembering any of it. I paused the video and stared at my own face on the screen, trying to remember that night, but there was nothing. just a blank space where those memories should have been. I saved the video to a separate folder and tried not to think about how many other nights like that there might have been. My phone buzzed with a text from Asher, and I almost didn't want to look at it, but when I opened it, I saw he'd sent me screenshots of our group chat from that weekend at the lake. I scrolled through dozens of messages about typical teenage drama and stupid dares and someone's ex showing up. There were messages about me being really drunk and people being worried, but nothing about crimes or hurting anyone or doing anything actually terrible. The relief I felt was huge, like I could finally breathe properly for the first time in weeks. But it was also confusing because if I didn't do anything terrible, why was Mom so convinced I had? Why was she so obsessed with what I'd buried and what I supposedly needed to confess? I texted Asher back thanking him for the screenshots and asking if he remembered anything else from that night. He said he'd think about it and let me know. At dinner that night, Mom barely looked at me while we ate. Charlotte and Hazel kept glancing between us like they were waiting for something to explode. Halfway through the meal, Mom put down her fork and said she wanted to see my phone. She said she had a right to know who I was talking to and what I was saying, especially after I'd been sneaking around on the computer. She threatened to call the school if I didn't hand it over right then. I looked at her across the table, and for the first time ever, I said no, just flat out refused. The look on her face was equal parts shocked and furious, like she couldn't believe I was actually standing up to her. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out, but I held my ground. I told her my phone was private, and she didn't have the right to go through it just because she was paranoid. She started to say something else, but I got up from the table and went to my room, leaving my plate half full. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mom might try something while I was sleeping. I locked my door and wedged a chair under the handle like I'd seen in movies. It felt both powerful and really sad that I had to protect myself from my own mother in my own house. I lay in bed listening to every sound, jumping at footsteps in the hallway and the house settling. I barely slept, but when I did drift off, I didn't have the usual nightmares about mysterious crimes I couldn't remember. Instead, I dreamed about digging holes that got deeper and deeper, but never had anything at the bottom. The next morning before school, I waited in the hallway until I heard Charlotte in the bathroom. I knocked and went in before she could tell me to wait. She was brushing her teeth and looked annoyed at first, but then she saw my face and her expression changed. I asked her directly about the worst night last summer, told her I needed the truth, and I wasn't leaving until she told me. She spit out her toothpaste and rinsed her mouth, stalling for time. Finally, she admitted that Mom found a video of me blackout drunk last summer and completely freaked out. Charlotte said Mom became obsessed with what else might have happened that she didn't know about, convinced that if I was that drunk, I must have done something terrible. She said Mom started going through everyone's phones and computers after that, looking for evidence of secrets or dangerous behavior. Hearing this made me feel less alone, but also angry that Mom's paranoia had been affecting my siblings too. This was bigger than just me and my supposed crimes from last summer. I headed to the school feeling this weird mix of anger and relief, like finally knowing I wasn't the only target of Mom's paranoia somehow made it less crushing, even though it was still awful. During first period, I pulled out my phone under my desk and texted Asher asking if he remembered the exact location of that blue house from last summer, saying I needed to find it and could he help me figure out where it was. My hands were shaking a little, typing it out, because this felt like the first real step I was taking, instead of just reacting to Mom's threats. Asher texted back within minutes, saying he remembered it was near the state park by the lake, and he'd help me search rental listings to narrow it down. He said he was totally on board with whatever I needed, and that made me feel like I actually had people I could trust, which was something I'd started to doubt over the past few weeks. We went back and forth during the breaks between classes, him sending screenshots of vacation rental sites, while I tried to remember any details about the house itself. The blue siding was the main thing I could recall, and maybe it had a deck facing the water, but everything else from that weekend was pretty hazy. By lunch, I had a free period, so I went straight to the library instead of the cafeteria, pulling up the Public Property Records website on one of the computers in the back corner. I typed in the lake name and started filtering for residential properties with rental history, my leg bouncing under the desk as I clicked through page after page of listings. The focused research actually calmed my anxiety in a way nothing else had lately, like I was solving a puzzle instead of drowning in fear and confusion. After about 20 minutes, I found a property listing that matched, a blue-sided cottage about a mile from the state park entrance that had been used as a vacation rental for the past 5 years. I took screenshots of everything, including the address, and added them to a folder on my phone, labeling it evidence, even though I wasn't totally sure what I'd do with all this documentation. Finding the actual address felt like a huge win, like I was building my own case against Mom's manipulation, even if I didn't know the endgame yet. After school, I was in my room texting Asher the address when I heard Mom's footsteps coming down the hallway and I quickly locked my phone and shoved it in my pocket. She knocked once and opened the door without waiting for me to answer, which she'd been doing a lot lately. I could tell something was wrong by the tight look on her face, and she asked me point blank if I'd been talking to Asher about going somewhere. My stomach dropped because I realized she must have been listening somehow, maybe through the wall, or maybe she'd figured out how to access my texts remotely. I told her it was none of her business, and she completely lost it, saying I was not allowed to go anywhere near that lake house, and if I tried, she'd ground me for the rest of the year. She kept using this fake, concerned voice, saying she was protecting me from bad influences and dangerous situations, but I could see the panic in her eyes, and it hit me that she was actually scared of what I might find out if I went there. I asked her what she thought I was going to find, and she just repeated that I knew what I did, and I needed to stop playing dumb. The conversation went nowhere, and ended with her taking my car keys from my desk drawer, saying I wouldn't need them if I wasn't going anywhere. After she left, I sat on my bed feeling trapped and angry, but also more determined than before, because her reaction proved there was something real about that blue house that she didn't want me to discover. The next morning, I asked to see the counselor during homeroom, and when I got to her office, I sat down and told her I was planning to visit a location from last summer with a friend to try to figure out what actually happened during a night I couldn't remember. She listened carefully and suggested bringing a trusted adult along for safety and support, which made sense, but also made me nervous about this turning into a bigger thing with parents and administrators getting involved. I thanked her for the advice, but in my head, I was already deciding against it, because I needed to do this on my own terms, without Mom finding out and making it worse. She gave me this look like she knew I wasn't going to follow her suggestion, but she didn't push it, just reminded me that her door was always open if things got complicated. I left her office feeling supported, but also aware that I was choosing to handle this alone, which was both scary and necessary. That evening after dinner, Hazel caught me in the hallway and pulled me into her room, closing the door behind us. She whispered that she'd found something on her phone and wanted to show me, her voice shaking a little. She pulled up her settings and showed me this parental monitoring app that had been installed months ago, something that tracked her location and let someone read all her text messages remotely. The betrayal on her face was so raw it hurt to look at, and I realized she was feeling the same violation I'd been dealing with since finding out about the blackmail emails. I showed her some of the screenshots I'd taken of Mom's unsent email drafts, and we just sat there for a minute processing how messed up this all was. We made a pact right there to have each other's backs against Mom's surveillance, to warn each other if we noticed anything weird, and to stop keeping her secrets for her. Having Hazel on my side made me feel less alone in the house, like we were building our own alliance against the paranoia and control. Later that night, Asher video called me, and after we talked about the Blue House location for a few minutes, his expression got more serious, and he brought up my drinking from last summer. He asked if I'd thought about why I was getting so wasted back then, and I immediately got defensive, asking what that had to do with anything. He said he was asking because he cared, and he'd been worried about me even before all this blackmail stuff started, that he'd seen me using alcohol to deal with stress, and it scared him. I wanted to hang up, but something about his tone made me actually listen, and I reluctantly admitted that, yeah, I'd been drinking to numb out when things got hard, and the blackouts scared me too. He didn't lecture me or act superior, just said he was glad I was being honest, and that he'd be there if I wanted to talk about it more. After we hung up, I felt exposed, but also weirdly relieved, like saying it out loud to someone made it more real and less shameful somehow. Around midnight, I couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs and opened the computer in the den, pulling up that throwaway email account one more time. There was a new draft Mom had written but not sent, and reading it made my blood go cold. She'd written out this detailed message threatening to report my substance abuse to every college I was applying to, complete with dates and descriptions of times she claimed I'd been drunk. The fear that shot through me was different from before, because I realized she wasn't just trying to scare me into confessing to some mystery crime. She was actively building a case against me with evidence she could use as ammunition. She was collecting proof of my worst moments to use as leverage if I didn't comply with whatever she wanted from me. I took screenshots of that draft and every other unsent message, my hands shaking as I saved each one. Then I went back through my texts with Hazel and took screenshots of the monitoring software she'd found, and I created a new folder on my phone backing everything up in 3 different places, including my cloud storage. Having all this documented evidence made me feel less powerless for the first time in weeks, like I was building my own case, even though I still wasn't sure what I'd do with it. The next day, I texted Asher, and we made a plan to visit the Blue House on Saturday morning using a rideshare app since Mom had my keys. I felt this mix of nervous anticipation and determination as we coordinated pickup times and the address, like I was finally taking real action instead of just reacting to threats and manipulation. When Miles asked what I was doing Saturday, I told him I was going to the library to work on college essays, which made me feel guilty because he'd been nothing but supportive through all of this. But I needed to do this without the whole family getting involved, and without Mom finding out before I could actually get there. I saved the rideshare confirmation and added it to my evidence folder, then spent the rest of the evening trying not to think about what I might find at that blue house, or what Mom was so desperate to keep me from discovering. Saturday morning, I met Asher at the rideshare pickup spot near the library. He was wearing his old summer camp hoodie and carrying a backpack with water bottles and snacks, like we were going on some normal adventure. The driver pulled up in a silver sedan, and we climbed in the back. Asher gave the address to the lake neighborhood, and we settled in for the hour drive. I stared out the window, watching familiar streets turn into highway, then countryside. My stomach felt tight, and I kept running through worst-case scenarios in my head. What if we got there and I remembered something awful? What if the property owner called the cops on us for trespassing? Asher didn't try to fill the silence with pointless small talk. About 20 minutes in, he pointed out a rest stop where we'd gotten milkshakes last summer. Then later, he mentioned a weird billboard we'd joked about. His voice was casual and steady, not pushing me to respond or explain what I was thinking. Having him there made the nerves more manageable somehow. Like whatever we found, I wouldn't be dealing with it completely alone. The GPS showed we were getting close, and I felt my breathing speed up. We turned off the main road onto a smaller street that wound through trees. Then the lake came into view, sun glinting off the water. The driver slowed down as we entered a neighborhood of rental houses. My heart started hammering when I saw the blue house. It looked exactly like it did in my hazy memories. The paint was that specific shade of faded blue, almost gray. There was a stone fire pit in the front yard. A car sat in the driveway, some newer SUV with out-of-state plates. Someone was definitely staying there. The driver pulled over across the street and we got out. I stood on the sidewalk staring at the house while Asher paid and the car drove off. Now we were stuck here until we could call another ride. The blue house looked smaller than I remembered, but the layout was right. 2 stories, big windows facing the lake, a wraparound porch. I had no plan for how to explain why we were here or what we wanted. My mouth felt dry. Before I could figure out what to do, a guy came out of the house next door. He was probably in his 40s, wearing cargo shorts and a fishing hat. He walked down his driveway toward us with a friendly but curious expression. "You kids lost?" he called out. "Need directions somewhere?" I looked at Asher, and then back at the guy. My brain was scrambling for a cover story, but then I just decided to tell the truth. Or most of it anyway. "Actually, I stayed at that blue rental last summer," I said, pointing, "with some friends. And I think I left something buried in the yard. I know that sounds weird, but it was kind of a dumb teenage thing. Is there any way I could get permission to look for it?" The guy studied me for a second, then glanced at the blue house. "Buried something, huh? What kind of something?" "Just personal stuff," I said. "Like a time capsule kind of thing. Nothing valuable or dangerous or anything. I just really want to get it back." He nodded slowly. "I'm Dexter. I actually manage that property and a few others on this street. You said you were here last summer?" "Yeah, in July, I think. There were like 6 of us staying for a weekend." Dexter's face changed like he was remembering something. "Oh yeah, I got a noise complaint that weekend. You guys were having a bonfire pretty late. Had to come over and ask you to keep it down." My face got hot with embarrassment, but also relief flooded through me. A noise complaint. That was it. Not property damage. Not someone getting hurt. Just teenagers being too loud. "Yeah, that was us. I'm really sorry about that." "Hey, happens all the time with the summer rentals," Dexter said. "No police report or anything? You weren't the worst group we've had, not by a long shot. So you want to dig around in the yard? If that's okay, it would just take a few minutes. I'm pretty sure I know where it is." Something about how anxious I must have looked made him agree. "All right, I'll supervise. Come on." We followed him across the street and around the side of the blue house. Asher caught up beside me and squeezed my shoulder. The gesture was quick and supportive, not making a big deal of it. My legs felt shaky as we walked into the backyard. The fire pit was still there, blackened stones in a circle. The grass was longer than I remembered. I tried to picture where I'd been in that video, stumbling around in the dark, near the fire pit on the left side. I walked over to that area and crouched down. The soil looked a little different there, maybe less grass growing. "This is where you buried it?" Dexter asked, watching with mild curiosity. "I think so." I started digging with my hands, pushing aside dirt and small rocks. The ground was harder than I expected. Dexter didn't offer a shovel, but he didn't stop me either. Asher knelt down next to me and helped clear away loose dirt. My fingers were getting dirty, and my nails were caked with soil. About 6 inches down, I felt something solid and metallic. My heart jumped. I dug around the edges and pulled out a small tin, the kind that might have held mints or candies. It was rusted and dented, but still sealed. I sat back on my heels holding it, suddenly scared to open it. Asher and Dexter were both watching me. I pried open the lid with my thumbs. Inside were bottle caps, the kind from the craft beer someone's older brother had bought us. A cheap friendship bracelet made of embroidery thread, colors faded, A piece of notebook paper folded up small. I unfolded it carefully and saw my own handwriting, messy and slanted. Sorry for being such a mess. Trying to do better. And underneath that, another note in different pen. Don't forget who you are. I stared at these things I'd buried while drunk and scared. Past me trying to leave a message for future me. The kid who wrote this was worried about losing himself, about becoming someone he didn't recognize. Looking at the items made my chest hurt in this tender, sad way. I'd been so lost last summer. Asher cleared his throat quietly. I need to tell you something, he said, about that night. I looked up at him. Dexter had wandered a few steps away to give us space. I filmed you that night, Asher continued. Not to be creepy or anything. You were talking about drinking more and I was worried you'd get sick or hurt yourself. I wanted to show you later what you were like so maybe you'd slow down. And I sent the video to your siblings' group chat because I didn't know what else to do. I was asking for help. My face burned with embarrassment. So that's how Mom got the video, through the family group chat. But looking at Asher's concerned expression, I felt grateful too. He'd been trying to take care of me when I couldn't take care of myself. Thanks for telling me, I managed to say. We thanked Dexter and walked back to the street to call a rideshare. During the drive home, I turned the tin over in my hands, thinking. I had everything I needed now, the tin with its innocent contents. Dexter's confirmation that nothing criminal happened. The understanding of how Mom got that video. When we got back to town, I told Asher I was going to confront Mom with all of it. He offered to come with me for backup, but I said no. This was something I needed to do alone. He hugged me before getting out of the car at his house, telling me to text him later. I got home that afternoon and found Mom in the kitchen. Can we talk? In the living room? She followed me, her expression wary. I sat on the couch and pulled out the tin, setting it on the coffee table between us. Her whole body tensed. I went to the Blue House today, I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. I found what I buried. It was this, bottle caps and a friendship bracelet and some notes I wrote to myself. That's it. That's the big secret. I watched her face cycle through shock, confusion, maybe relief. I also talked to the property manager. He remembered us from last summer. There was a noise complaint. No police report, no property damage, nothing illegal, just teenagers being loud. Mom opened her mouth, but I kept going. I know how you got the video. Asher sent it to the family chat because he was worried about me. And yeah, I was a mess that night, but I didn't commit some crime. I didn't hurt anyone. I was just a scared kid who drank too much and buried a time capsule. And I saw fear mixed with something that looked like shame, her mouth opening but no sound coming out at first. I held up my phone showing the photo of her sent emails, and she flinched like I'd hit her. Then she closed the laptop slowly, and her whole body seemed to cave in on itself. She started crying, and I just stood there watching, not moving closer, waiting for her to explain how she could do this to me for weeks. Mom wiped her face with shaking hands and told me she found a video from last summer where I was completely wasted, and it scared her so badly because her brother struggled with addiction his whole life, and she watched it destroy him. Her voice cracked when she said she panicked seeing me like that, convinced herself I must have done something terrible I was hiding, and the blackmail was her twisted way of trying to force me to confess, so she could fix it before I ended up like her brother. I felt my anger shift slightly hearing about her brother, but I pushed it down because that didn't excuse what she did to me. I pulled out the tin from my bag and set it on the desk next to the computer, telling her I went to the Blue House today, and found what I supposedly buried, opening it to show her the bottle caps and friendship bracelet and notes. Mom stared at the contents looking confused, and I explained what the property manager said, that there was just a noise complaint, no police report, nothing criminal, just teenagers being loud and stupid. She reached for the tin, but I moved it away and started listing everything she put me through, keeping my voice steady even though I wanted to scream. I told her about lying awake every night for weeks, my hands shaking every time I opened my locker, avoiding my friends because I didn't know who to trust, taking different routes to class like I was hunted. I described how I stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria, how I jumped at every email notification, how her messages made me doubt my own mind and memories, until I didn't know what was real anymore. Mom's face crumpled more with each thing I said, and she kept trying to interrupt, but I talked over her because she needed to hear all of it, needed to understand what her fear-driven choices actually did to me. I watched tears run down her face as I explained how I suspected my own siblings, searched their rooms, felt paranoid in my own house, how the stress made me feel like I was losing my mind. She finally managed to say she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me that badly, but then she started trying to justify it by saying everything came from love and worry about my future. I cut her off and told her that intent doesn't erase impact, that what she did was a form of abuse even if she didn't mean it that way, and I saw her physically recoil from the word like I'd slapped her. Mom started to argue that abuse was too strong a word, but I stood my ground and said that threatening someone, making them feel unsafe, manipulating them with fear, that's what abuse is, regardless of the reason behind it. I laid out my conditions clearly and firmly, telling her she stops monitoring everyone's devices immediately. No more secret threats or manipulation of any kind. And we all need to consider family therapy because this family is broken in ways I'm only starting to understand. Mom looked resistant when I mentioned therapy, her face shifting from guilty to defensive, and I could see her struggling between her need to control everything and her guilt over hurting me so badly. She agreed to stop the emails and delete the monitoring software for now, but wouldn't commit to therapy yet, saying she needed time to think about it, and I accepted this partial victory because I knew real change doesn't happen overnight. The conversation ended with both of us exhausted, tension still thick in the air between us, but at least everything was out in the open now, and she knew I wasn't going to just let this go. I went back to my room and texted Charlotte and Hazel to meet me in my room, and when they showed up looking worried, I told them to close the door and sit down because we needed to talk. I explained everything from finding the email account to confronting Mom tonight, showing them the tin and the screenshots of the threatening messages, and Charlotte's face shifted from shock to relief, while Hazel got progressively more angry. Hazel started ranting about how Mom had been spying on all of us, how she found monitoring software on her phone weeks ago, and Charlotte admitted she'd suspected something was wrong with how Mom was acting, but didn't know what. We talked for over an hour about how we could support each other and not keep Mom's controlling behavior secret anymore, and it felt like we were building our own alliance against the dysfunction instead of each dealing with it alone. I took a deep breath and admitted something I'd been avoiding saying out loud, telling them I've been drinking too much, and the memory gaps from last summer scare me, asking them to call me out if they see me going down that path again. Charlotte got up and hugged me tight, saying she was proud of me for being honest, and even Hazel seemed less angry and more concerned, promising she'd tell me if she thought I was overdoing it. We made a pact to check in with each other regularly and to back each other up if Mom started slipping back into her old patterns, and having that support felt like something solid I could hold on to. Monday morning, I went straight to Missy McGee's office before first period and asked if we could talk, and she cleared her schedule to sit with me. I gave her a summary of what happened without naming Mom specifically, just saying the blackmailer turned out to be a family member who was worried about my drinking, and she listened carefully while taking notes. Mr. McGee asked good questions about how I was coping now and what support I had at home, and when I mentioned my siblings were being supportive, but I felt like I needed more help, she nodded and pulled out a folder. She gave me information for a counselor who works with teenagers dealing with family issues and substance use, explaining that having a neutral professional to talk to could really help me process everything. I took the papers and folded them carefully, and Ms. McGee reminded me that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness, and I tried to believe her, even though part of me felt embarrassed about needing therapy. After the meeting, I sat in my car in the parking lot and stared at the counselor's phone number, my hand shaking slightly as I pulled out my phone. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it, and a receptionist answered, and I stumbled through explaining I was a high school student who needed to set up an intake appointment. The receptionist was kind and professional, asking basic questions about my insurance and availability, and we scheduled an appointment for next Wednesday afternoon. Admitting I needed professional help felt scary, but also like I was being brave and taking control of my life, instead of just reacting to everything happening around me. I texted Asher during lunch asking if he wanted to meet up after school, and he suggested the coffee shop near his house where we used to hang out last summer. When I got there, he was already at a corner table with 2 drinks, and I sat down feeling nervous about what I needed to say. We started talking about regular stuff, but then I brought up the conversation we needed to have about boundaries around drinking, and Asher put down his cup and gave me his full attention. I told him I'd been using alcohol to cope with stress, and that needed to stop, and I asked if he'd be willing to call me out if he saw me going down that path again. Asher agreed immediately and said he'd been worried about me for months, but didn't know how to bring it up without seeming judgmental, and we talked through what that accountability would actually look like in practice. He told me he values our friendship too much to watch me hurt myself, and hearing him say that made me realize how lucky I am to have someone who cares enough to be honest with me, even when it's uncomfortable. We agreed to check in regularly and be real with each other about how we're both doing, not just pretend everything's fine when it's not, and leaving the coffee shop, I felt like I had one more solid person in my corner. That weekend at home, I walked past the den and saw Mom sitting at the computer with the browser open to the throwaway email account. She clicked through the folders methodically, and I stood in the doorway watching her select everything and hit delete, then empty the trash, and finally close the account entirely. She knew I was there, but neither of us said anything, and when she stood up and walked past me, the air between us felt thick with things we weren't ready to talk about yet. Dinner that night was awkward, with everyone passing dishes and making small talk about nothing important, and I caught Charlotte giving me concerned looks, while Hazel scrolled on her phone, ignoring everyone. Mom asked about my homework in this careful tone, like she was testing whether we could have normal conversations again, and I answered in short sentences because I didn't trust myself to say more without all the anger coming back out. I went to bed early that night and actually fell asleep before midnight for the first time in weeks, my body finally relaxing now that the constant threat was gone. Around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Asher about weekend plans, and I jolted awake with my heart racing, that same panic response flooding my system, even though I knew there was no danger anymore. I lay there in the dark, waiting for my heartbeat to slow down, and realized that just because the blackmail stopped doesn't mean my body had gotten the message yet. The fear had become such a part of me over those weeks that it was going to take time to convince my nervous system that I was actually safe now, and I had to accept that recovery wasn't going to be instant just because I knew the truth. Monday morning at the school, I grabbed my books from my locker and walked toward first period when I passed 2 girls from my English class huddled by the water fountain. They got quiet when they saw me, but I caught the end of their conversation, something about drama and someone's family, and the way they looked at me made it pretty clear they were talking about my situation. I felt my face get hot, and my first instinct was to stop and explain everything, to defend myself and make sure they understood what really happened, but I kept walking instead. People were going to whisper and make assumptions no matter what I said, and I was tired of trying to control what everyone thought about me. Let them talk, I decided, because their opinions didn't change the actual facts of what happened, and I wasn't going to waste energy trying to manage rumors I couldn't stop anyway. That afternoon after school, I went to my room and pulled out the rusted tin from the blue house that I'd hidden in my desk drawer. I opened it carefully and took out the note that said, "Don't forget who you are," in my drunk handwriting from last summer, and I read it several times thinking about what that version of me had been trying to say. He was scared and messed up, but he still cared enough to leave himself a message, still believed there was something worth remembering even when he felt lost. I grabbed a pen and a scrap of paper and wrote, "You're stronger than you think, and you deserve honesty," in small, careful letters, then folded it and placed it in the tin with the other stuff. I sealed the whole thing back up and put it on my bookshelf where I could see it, a reminder of where I'd been and what I'd survived and what I was trying to become. A few days later, I waited until after dinner when everyone else had scattered to their rooms. Then I found Mom in the kitchen putting away dishes. I asked if we could talk, and she nodded slowly, and we sat down at the table with all this space between us that felt bigger than just the physical distance. I told her straight out that if she went back to the monitoring or manipulation or any of the controlling stuff, I would leave and stay with Miles at his college apartment or find somewhere else to go. Her face crumpled a little, and she started to say something about just wanting to protect me, but I cut her off and explained that I needed to know I had options, that I wouldn't accept being controlled like that ever again. She looked hurt and opened her mouth to argue, but I held firm, keeping my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking under the table. After a long silence, she nodded once and said she understood, though I could tell she didn't really agree, but at least she heard me set the boundary clearly. Wednesday afternoon, I showed up at the therapist's office 15 minutes early because I was nervous and didn't know what else to do with myself. The waiting room had boring magazines and bland art on the walls, and when the therapist finally called me back, I followed her into a small office that smelled like lavender. She asked me basic questions about what brought me in, and I gave her the summary about family issues and stress, leaving out the specific details about the blackmail, because I wasn't ready to get into all that yet. She listened without judging, and then asked about my coping mechanisms, and when I mentioned drinking, sometimes she zeroed in on that immediately. She wanted me to start tracking when I drink, and what emotions trigger it, pulling out a little chart and explaining how to fill it out. I felt resistant, because tracking meant admitting how often I was actually using alcohol to numb out. But she said it was just information gathering for 2 weeks, and I agreed, because saying no would have been admitting I was scared of what the tracking would show. Later that week, I noticed Charlotte had a bunch of college brochures spread across her bed, all schools that were at least 5 hours away from home. I leaned against her doorframe and asked if she was really thinking about going that far, and she looked up at me with this tired expression that made her seem older than 18. She admitted she needed distance from Mom's intensity, and that she loved our family, but also needed space to figure out who she was without constant surveillance and expectations. We ended up talking for almost an hour about how suffocating it felt sometimes to live under Mom's rules and worry, and Charlotte said something that stuck with me about how you can love people and still need to protect yourself from them. Hearing her say out loud what I'd been feeling made me realize I wasn't the only one struggling with this, and it was actually comforting to know my older sister felt suffocated too, and was making plans to create healthy distance. A couple days after that, Hazel cornered me in the hallway before school and told me she'd confronted Mom about the phone monitoring software. She'd found it while trying to download an app and had marched straight to Mom demanding her privacy back, and apparently they'd had a huge argument that ended with Mom actually agreeing to remove the software. Hazel looked proud of herself in a way that made me want to high-five her, and I told her I was impressed she stood up for herself like that. She shrugged and said she figured if I could set boundaries, then she could too, and I realized that my confrontation with Mom had given my little sister permission to do the same thing. Watching Hazel advocate for herself made me feel like maybe something good was coming out of this whole mess, like the family dynamics were shifting in a healthier direction, even if it was uncomfortable and messy. Miles came home that weekend and I caught him alone in his room unpacking his overnight bag. I closed the door and told him everything that had happened since we traced the IP address, about confronting Mom and finding the tin and setting boundaries and starting therapy. His face went through a bunch of expressions while I talked, landing on angry when I described Mom's blackmail campaign and worried when I mentioned my drinking. He made me promise to keep going to therapy and to call him anytime things got bad again, saying he was only an hour away and could come home whenever I needed him. Having my older brother say that out loud, that he was there for me no matter what, meant more than I could put into words. He also said he was going to have his own conversation with Mom about boundaries and respect, and I felt grateful that I wasn't fighting this battle completely alone anymore. The following Wednesday, I walked into my second therapy appointment, carrying the tracking log I'd been filling out for 2 weeks. My therapist asked to see it, and I handed it over, feeling my face get hot with shame as she looked at the entries showing I'd been drinking almost every weekend and twice during the week when I had tests. She didn't look shocked or judgmental, just thoughtful, and when she looked up, she asked me what I noticed about the patterns. I admitted that I'd been drinking way more than I realized, and that it was clearly tied to stress and anxiety, and saying it out loud to another person made it real in a way it hadn't been when it was just my private behavior. We started making a plan for healthier coping strategies, writing down specific things I could try. When I felt the urge to drink, and even though part of me wanted to defend my choices, I knew deep down that I needed to change this pattern before it got worse. A few days after that therapy session, Mom knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to talk about college applications. I looked up from my laptop expecting some kind of trap or manipulation, but her face just looked tired and maybe a little hopeful. We sat at the kitchen table and went through my list of schools, and she asked normal questions about deadlines and essay topics without bringing up my drinking or last summer or any of the stuff that had been hanging over us for months. It only lasted maybe 20 minutes before things got a little awkward, and she went back to making dinner, but it felt like something had shifted, even if just a tiny bit. The conversation was surface level and careful, like we were both walking on glass, but it was the first time in forever that we'd talked without all that underlying tension and anger. I went back to my room feeling weird about it, not exactly hopeful, but not completely hopeless either, like maybe we could eventually get to a place where we weren't always fighting or avoiding each other. That weekend, Asher texted me about a bonfire some friends were having and asked if I wanted to come. I almost said no because bonfires usually meant drinking, and I was trying to stick to my therapist's plan, but then he added that there would be soda and stuff too. When I got there, I noticed right away that he'd set up a whole separate cooler with non-alcoholic drinks, and nobody was pressuring anyone to drink. Asher caught my eye from across the fire and gave me this little nod like he understood what I was dealing with and had my back. I grabbed a Coke and sat down with everyone, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could just hang out without needing alcohol to deal with my anxiety. Watching my friends laugh and mess around, I realized I was building something real here, a group of people who actually cared about my well-being and weren't just party buddies. My eyes got a little wet, and I had to look away for a second because it hit me how much that mattered. Later that night, I was alone in my room scrolling through old texts from 2 months ago when the blackmail was happening. Reading back through my panicked messages to Miles and my paranoid questions to Charlotte made me realize how far I'd come since finding that first letter in my locker. I wasn't constantly scared anymore, jumping at every notification or avoiding my own family. I knew the truth about last summer now, about the time capsule and the video and Mom's twisted attempt to protect me from myself. Instead of just reacting to manufactured crises, I was actually dealing with the real problems, the drinking and the anxiety and the family dysfunction that had been there all along. Things with Mom were still complicated, and honestly, probably always would be. She wasn't suddenly a different person, and I wasn't magically healed from everything that happened. But I had boundaries now that I'd never had before, and people who supported me when things got hard. I was learning healthier ways to handle stress, instead of just numbing out with alcohol or pretending everything was fine. My therapist kept reminding me that recovery wasn't linear, and some days would be harder than others. I wasn't fixed or healed, but I was moving forward with more honesty and self-awareness than I'd ever had in my life. Sitting there in my room with the tin from the Blue House on my desk, I thought about the note I'd written to myself, about being stronger than I thought and deserving honesty. That felt like enough for right now, just knowing I was trying and had people in my corner and wasn't alone in this anymore.